It's not often that a brand new airline enters the scene, but that's exactly what recently happened with a player who boasted some pretty lofty promises. This new airline didn't order a fleet of new efficient narrow bodies or promised a slick low-cost model. Instead, they would launch with the largest passenger aircraft in the world, the Airbus A380, and with just one of them to start. In an era when the biggest airlines in the world have been retiring their super jumbos, this UK-based startup announced that they would instead be bringing back this giant, not as a niche charter, but as the centerpiece of a luxurious, new, high-capacity transatlantic airline. And their promises around how the passenger experience was going to be were equally lofty. This newcomer is called Global Airlines. So how did their launch go? James Asquith, a young British entrepreneur, travel influencer, and the founder of Global Airlines, had a bold, attention-grabbing pitch. Global Airlines, he said, would restore glamour to air travel, not just with better food or more legroom, but by launching a brand new airline built around a radical new concept. Global would operate 5 classes of service instead of the normal 3 or 4. There would be economy, premium economy, business class, and first class. That's 4, and so far so good, a bit fancy and complicated maybe for a new entrant, but not entirely unusual. But the 5th option would be something that he called gamer class, an onboard video game section meant to appeal to the younger passengers. Details were quite scant, but there were hints of pods equipped with gaming consoles where users could play against each other, among other things. Of course, there would also be cocktail bars, onboard lounges, and extra space for all, but it was the choice of aircraft that probably raised the most eyebrows, at least from industry insiders. Asquith announced that he had acquired a used Airbus A380 outright, and that he had plans to operate transatlantic flights from London to New York and Los Angeles, where 3 more A380s would then later join the fleet. Now, that choice of aircraft was a bold one, to say the least. Operating with the world's largest super jumbo is a task so hard that many of the world's largest airlines have either retired their Airbus A380s already or decided never to buy them in the first place. So the A380 was a quite strange choice and a heck of a bombshell to open with. Now, Global's branding was sleek. The renderings looked fantastic, and thousands of people on social media were soon both intrigued and excited about what was going to come. So, how did that revival go then? Well, for starters, an early hint that not everything was as promised was that Global Airlines never obtained its proper licensing. Despite early claims that they had approvals in place, Global did not secure their own Air Operator Certificate, or AOC, which is the foundational legal document needed to operate an airline. Getting one of those can take years and require deep regulatory scrutiny, financial transparency, as well as experienced staff. But Global didn't have that yet, and they didn't want to wait to get it either. So they instead outsourced. Rather than flying under their own AOC, Global ended up partnering with Highfly Malta, a subsidiary of a Portuguese charter operator called Highfly, to handle all of their flight operations. In industry terms, this is called a wet lease, when one airline provides the aircraft, crew, maintenance and insurance, and another airline essentially pays to use it. And that is exactly what Highfly did for Global. They provided the pilots, the operational control, and at least some of the cabin crew, whilst Global got to put their logo on the plane and on the tickets. The point here is that for a supposedly full-service airline with big ambitions, relying on a wet lease meant that Global wasn't in control of its own operations. Instead, it was more like a branded wrapper around someone else's flight, and that's with some pretty hefty promises on how that other operator would perform in terms of service and quality. First of all, the passenger numbers on the first few flights were not that great, to say the least. On a jet with seats for over 500 people, the inaugural Glasgow to JFK flight carried about 170 passengers, including most of those vloggers. Later flights reportedly had even fewer people on board, some with under 100 passengers, which is obviously far below what would be needed just to cover the lease payments, let alone fuel and supplies like food. And the passenger experience? How was that? Well, according to those same travel influencers, it was mixed at best. The Airbus A380 burns more fuel, takes longer to board, requires more crew and more maintenance than smaller twin jets do. So for the numbers to work, it has to carry more passengers and sometimes even at higher prices than the other planes do. Secondly, there's the infrastructure issue. You see, not every airport can even handle the Airbus A380. It needs wide taxiways, extra tall jet bridges and reinforced parking stands, which, you guessed it, cost more money. They only have one plane right now, so if that one is in for repair, well then the entire airline either stops operating or have to lease in extra planes at crazy prices. On top of that, if a technical fault would be found just before a flight, for example, and they can't get it back online quickly, well then they would have to rebook hundreds of passengers on competitor airlines. So for global airlines, the Airbus A380 was always going to be a high-stakes bet. One that required enormous scale, flawless logistics and consistent demand, and preferably quite a bit of experience too. So what will happen to global airlines now then? Well, the official word is that the Airbus A380 is undergoing maintenance and upgrades, that the airline is simply pausing between phases and that more flights will still come. The idea is that they might resume service later in 2025 or 2026, and that is perfectly possible, but most people aren't really holding their breath.